This conference also, we need to recognize the people who made it possible. And particularly some of those grand champions are our local planning committee. So let's take a minute to thank these people for their effort. So let's applause now. And then hold your applause as I list out a bunch of these names. So from the University of Buffalo, Carlin Chase, who has been keeping she's been holding it together this morning, which is awesome. She definitely deserves, a round of thanks and maybe a beer later. We also have from University of Buffalo, Sarah Cogley, Omar Brown, Carolyn Klotzbach Russell, Molly Maloney, Amanda McCormick, and Rose Orcutt from, I have never learned how to pronounce it, Lyricist. Okay, I have just learned that. Blake Carver, thank you. And from Princeton University Library, we have Francis Kahua. We are starting the first set of afternoon talks with Alyssa Panetta, talking about living the UX when a web developer develops a disability. That was a lot of Ds.
It's on purpose. Hi, my name is Alyssa Panetta. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm very excited to be here today to share this presentation, Living the User Experience when a Web Developer Develops a Disability. I'm the web designer and front-end developer for the university libraries at the University at Albany here in New York State. So today I want to share my experience with disability, and then as a web designer and developer who developed a disability later in life. And then I'll share some thoughts on how semantic HTML and modern CSS can make the internet a better place to be for more users. So a bit about me. I started making websites in 1999. I was in an internship at a math software company. It was my first year at undergrad studying math. And I've been doing it ever since. And I started my current role at the university libraries about 5 years ago. In October of 2020, I acquired a cognitive, visual, and motor disabilities, thanks to my breakup with Tallulah, my brain tumor. This was October of 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, and this is how I learned that she was there. And the doctors told me that she had been growing in my head for about 20 years. So as long as I had been making websites. So since then, I went through surgery, radiation, and chemo. And as of this past March, I'm extremely lucky to say that I'm okay. Thank you. I owe it all to my doctors. I'm here. They've got Tallulah preserved in a tumor bank in New York City. And we're going to talk about how this tumor changed my perspective on accessibility and the way that we make websites today. So the first web pages before I got there back in 1991, at the birth of the internet, they were supposed to be flexible and they were mostly text. They looked like Word documents with links. And the idea that every computer should be able to access and read them. Around 2000, when I started making websites, things had changed by then. After Flash came out in 1996 and became the cool thing to use, websites started being built within the box of the Flash player, which was only about 800 by 600 pixels. And it was like a little TV screen inside the web page. If you weren't using Flash, and I wasn't, you would even try to make sure that your HTML sites fit within that space too. And to do that, you'd have to count pixels and you'd have to keep your designs very rigid. And the best tool for that were HTML tables, which if you use those, you know they're not great tools. So then CSS grew, and the first big change that I saw in how we make websites happened around 2007 when the first iPhone came out. So now we could go view web pages on the go. We had a new screen size, a whole new orientation, and touch. So this was a whole new paradigm, and this is what we call the responsive era. And we handled them using new CSS media queries. And then there was the addition of Flexbox in CSS, which came in 2013. And this, for me, was another turning point in CSS for the progress we're making today. This is where modern CSS, for me, starts. Some people say it started more like Grid, but I think this was the turning point. It's also sometimes called intrinsic design. It's a world in which containers and content move, grow, and flex in relation to each other. So since 2013, CSS has come a long way. And for the first time in 20 years, I can say it's an exciting time to be working with CSS and HTML. And I think that's especially true if you're working on accessibility. The pandemic had a huge effect on society and the internet, of course, with everything going online from school to work and medicine. The emphasis to prioritize accessibility is greater than ever. One of my priorities as a web designer at the libraries has been accessibility, and that's by means of compliance with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And compliance with WCAG 2 is based on these 4 success criteria. Your site needs to be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So what does that really mean? How do we measure that? Basic measures of an accessible site are these. You need alt text on your images, you need color contrast for your text, video captions, and you need to support keyboard-only operability. And there are automated tests we can run to measure our compliance. So my site's compliant, but none of these features really helped me with my new cognitive disability. So I started wondering about WCAG 2's priorities. And as a math nerd, I started looking at stats regarding digital accessibility. And I wanted to know more about the user population, because now I was part of it. So I started with the CDC's website, and their report from 2018 said that 1 in 4 Americans have some kind of disability. And from a chart called Percentage of Adults with Functional Disability Types, I saw that 4.6 of American adults self-identified as being blind or having a serious difficulty seeing. Now let's look at the whole chart. So comparatively, vision disabilities are low. Now, not all of these categories are relevant to digital accessibility, like mobility, the biggest one. They define that as walking or climbing stairs. So that doesn't really have much about digital accessibility. And then there's independent living and self-care, which also aren't relevant. So let's dim the lights on those. And we can see that cognition is the largest disability category for digital accessibility. It's 10.8%, which is a little higher than vision and hearing combined at 10.5. But this is not a user category I'd ever been designing for. They've never been on my radar. And I've never seen them mentioned, but oh my goodness, this is me. I'm in this group. So after my brain surgery, I felt a lot less alone. So WCAG 2 was first published in 2008. Since then, we've learned a lot about the diversity of disability, and the good news is that they're on it. WCAG 3 reflects the diversity of disability by moving from the 4 success criteria and focusing on functional needs. It's 4 years away from being finalized, but we do have a draft, and we can start using and learning from it now. So let's take a look. So these are the functional needs. There's about 13 of them on here. And you can see it really reflects that diversity. And the functional needs describe a specific gap in one's ability or a specific mismatch between ability and the designed environment or context. It also acknowledges that functional needs can be situational or temporary, like somebody with a broken arm, long COVID, or a distracted parent. And the W3C has even organized a task force dedicated to cognitive accessibility. And they identified these new functional needs. And this is about half the list of the original ones that we just looked at. So you have attention, language and literacy, learning, memory, executive function, mental health, and cognitive and sensory intersections. They're publishing a great document called Making Content Usable for People with Cognitive and Learning Disabilities. It's a great resource, and you'll have the link and a lot of other links if you download this presentation. I have a lot of links, and I'm not going to have time to get through nearly all of my slides, so we're going to have to jump those. And we saw that cognitive is the largest disability category. We know these numbers are only going to grow as we age, right? Who here has issues with their memory? Yeah. I do, certainly now. And have you ever seen that get better as you get older? No, it just goes down, right? So not only are we going to get older, but you never know when you might have a brain tumor removed and you might need a little help. So my new challenges were across disability categories. I had trouble with my vision. I was incredibly sensitive to light. I still am. If you see me outside, you'll see me with a baseball cap and big sunglasses on. And I have a seizure disorder, poor memory, it got worse. All of these things, like they just got worse, you know. I have right side, the tumor was on my left side, so it caused like weakness on my right side. So every now and then I have like a little spasm. But it's a lot of things, right? And how could you know what it was like for me to use the internet with this combination of issues? You just can't, right? You can't know what kind of assistive tech would help me. It's like life, unless it's yours, you can't really know. And even after I give you a little walkthrough today, you're still not going to have, you know, like the best sense of what it is to be me. But what can you do? Without having a brain tumor and brain surgery, how can you get an idea of what my user experience is like? So if you want to know a user's experience, the best thing that you can do is to try it on. You can try on the technology someone might use. When my disability developed, I realized that this was something I had not ever done. I had only like listened to somebody use a screen reader in like a video, but I had never tried it myself. So let's do a show of hands. Has everyone tried a screen reader? Who has? Cool, that's good. How about your browser Zoom? You use browser Zoom a lot? Okay. What about reader mode in your browser? All right, so we're going down in numbers for anyone not being able to see here. What about a voice assistant? Yeah. And do you ever use a browser plugin that like overrides CSS on the other people's pages? So you write your own? Yeah, a couple people do, cool. So you guys were ahead of me, awesome. So as soon as I got back to the computer, I had a really hard time. I'm used to working very fast on a computer, as I'm sure everybody here is, but I couldn't do it. I burned out within minutes and my eyes were really, really struggling. So there were two major things I had to do. One, I had to slow down, which was really hard, and take a lot of breaks. And two, I needed larger text. I needed every bit of text on my screen to be like 3 times the size, especially at first. So I went straight to my OS settings. I'm on a Mac, and this is where I was set before. If you can see all the way at the top, the how small the text is, that's where I was comfortable before. But I had a lot of room for a lot of things on my screen. This is where I'm at now. I'm all the way at the other end of the settings. I had to sacrifice all that screen real estate to get the text, still not quite big enough for me. Like in the system preferences up at the top, that's still not very comfortable. So I started going to my applications, and this is where working on the internet was really helpful because mostly I need a browser and a text editor to do my work, and they support Zoom. So the WCAG 2 standard says that a user should be able to zoom up to 400%. But doing that in every browser had its own pain points. One, I was always confused with a mobile user because I was zoomed in by default. Two, infinite scroll wore me out like nothing else because nobody ever gave me a chance to look at anything else. And three, I still have not found a combination of assistive technologies that play nice together for what I need. I still don't even really know what I need. So let's take a look at some of those. So when you zoom in on a site, what it does is it reduces the width of the viewport. So that is how we trigger media queries for mobile a lot of times. So when I zoom from 120% to 170 on this email from my bank, the email switches to the mobile layout. Now, this is not the worst thing, but being somewhere between mobile and desktop views can get really confusing. Let's look at our library discovery layers, Primo. Say I want to find articles on CSS. So this is at 100%, and this is a typical layout pattern for me. I'm comfortable with this. I have a top menu and search. My left sidebar has the filters. All the content I'm looking for is centered. Very familiar. My brain is happy, and it has no trouble drilling down to find just articles. But what happens when I zoom in? Well, here we are at 200%. We're not even close to 400. And I have no idea where the filters have gone. This is not familiar to me, and my brain is not happy about it. So I have to go looking for them. I start scanning in the upper left, and it's not until I get to the bottom right that I find them. They're way down there, where I'd least expect them, especially since I'm accustomed to finding other icons there, right? If you use Primo, you've got the pin, you have all these other icons at the record level on the right. So, and you can see, like, I mean, this is my own page and I have not fixed any of these things yet, but it's going to get lost when you scroll under the chat widget and a lot of other things. So you see how, like, this is a small thing, but it took me ages to find that compared to how I'm used to finding things online. So it's a big difference on my cognitive load. That's the point. The cognitive load is increased significantly by having to look for things. Because you want users to rely on the patterns that they already know. That's one of the ways that we design and make it easier for people. All right, moving on. Infinite scroll. I've always had problems with compulsions, and snacking has always been my hardest. I have what I call an open container law. If I have a bag of Oreos and it's not open, it's fine. I can leave it there. I don't want to eat any of them. But as soon as that bag is open, my compulsive brain wants nothing more than to empty it. So I have to eat everything in the bag. And this is worse for me in the digital realm. And I know that social media and shopping sites are designed to take advantage of this weakness, but I'm mad at them because this is exhausting to me in my eyes. The scroll gets disorienting after a while, and sometimes I even get a little motion sick. So overall, the feeling was just overwhelmed. That's where I was. I had too many choices, too many combinations, too many options to even think about. So it wasn't long before I just stopped trying. I kind of have my things where I set them now, and I just deal with it. And that's what happens when users can't use your site. Eventually, they'll just stop trying. So as a user, I was overwhelmed, but as a designer, I'm now determined to practice better accessibility and share what I've learned on my journey and help make the internet a better place. All right, great, we're at 5 left. So that's my experience. So now we're gonna go through quick about semantic HTML and modern CSS and how these are gonna be the keys to making sites that are accessible to a lot of people. Definitely download this for the links. I'm gonna scroll past some real quick things. First, let's think about our digital accessibility, more like physical accessibility. So it's a real photo on my campus last week. If you can't see it, there's a short set of stone stairs with a metal ramp that's laid across them, leading to a grassy area. The ramp bottom doesn't quite meet the stone steps, so there's wood underneath in some places, which mostly looks rotted out now. So if you knew from the start that you were building a campus where users needed wheelchair access, is this the kind of ramp that you would build? No, of course not. And if you use a wheelchair, when you get up to this ramp, do you really want to go down it? And if you don't, is this something you even want to look at when you walk past it? I walked by it and I was like, this is a nice and pleasant environment. I don't want to walk by this. So this is what happens when we treat accessibility as an afterthought or just so that we're in legal compliance. We make a mess and we ruin it for everybody. So ideally, you would want your ramp to be built out of stone too. So stone in this case is our semantic HTML. And semantic HTML versus just regular HTML is HTML that has meaning. So it's tags that have meaning. So every user agent that goes there, it starts with the HTML. So this is the most important thing you can do. It's your stone of your website. So let's take a look at what that looks like. We have 2 versions of my site's footer on here. Just a quick show of hands. Who thinks that the one on the left that has all these divs and keys and spans is the semantic version? And all right, you guys are smart. I love it. So the one on the right is semantic, right? So we know that divs and spans only have meaning for layout, and you have to attach classes and IDs. But the classes and IDs, if you use an ID of nav, it's meaningless to everything except your style sheet. So it's not the same. And semantic HTML has one other huge advantage as we move forward, because the responsibility of accessibility is shifting from the designers. And even though we know we can do like 67% of accessibility, like bad things can be prevented in the design phase, but the browsers are stepping up, and they have a thing called Interop 2022. And it's a cross-browser initiative to find, address, and work towards fixing major interoperability issues. Mozilla had a statement about the project, and they said, the more semantic information the browser has, the better it can do at providing accessible versions of content. So even more reason, make it your #1 priority, and then work on your CSS. So this is the important thing about the CSS. You have to provide flexibility. So let's talk about what we can do to build flexible and resilient sites that increase our chances of exponentially of supporting all kinds of users. This is also future-proofing when you do this, because we don't know what's coming next, right? Who knows how the metaverse is gonna, deal with things. So how do we do that? Well, CSS has a bunch of really new features, and these are the ones that I think are the most impactful for adding flexibility to your site. So I don't have time to go into depth any of these, but I'll run you through some highlights, and there's links to experts. So one is relative units. If you're not using, we're broken away from the pixel entirely. So we have rem, m, percents, we have the ch character, we have units for the view height, view width, minimums and maximums. So use those, they're great. These are some wonderful resources on how you can do those and make your site awesome. There's CSS Math. And my favorite, as a math nerd, my two favorite functions are calc and clamp. Those can make everything flexible. Calc lets you mix units. So if you do have a site that has pixels, if you have like an old Bootstrap site and you need to calculate things between like your view width and minus certain amount of pixels, you can do that. And then clamp is awesome because it lets you establish a minimum. I'm sorry, I moved forward. A minimum, a maximum, and an ideal value. So yeah, all right. So there's calc, you have media queries for user preferences, grid is awesome, and you have container queries, which are the next game changer. They're so new, I don't know anything about them yet, but again, there are some resources here. So yeah, you can't know it, but you can try it on, so try it on. Make sure you start with Semantic HTML and go for flexibility with modern CSS. Again, download the presentation, you'll have all these links, and I have them up on a GitHub page too. So thank you so much. My name is Alyssa, and thank you. That's all.
Thank you very much, Alyssa. Great talk. We're switching to a Zoom talk right now, which will be with Thomas Dotson, talking about ebooks and accessibility. I'm wondering if there's a theme to this session.
I'm talking today about specifically EPUB 3.0 and accessibility. Usually when I give this kind of a talk, I have a number of different tools for viewing, previewing, and editing EPUBs, and we look at all of them, but don't really have time for that. So the best way to get access to that is, as with Alyssa's talk, to download the slides, which can take there are many more slides in that version than in the version I'm presenting today. And then also this bit.ly link takes you to a set of resources that cover this topic in more depth. So just to kind of be on the same page, the vast majority of ebooks, things that we refer to as ebooks, are actually read on digital devices in only a handful of formats. That includes EPUB, which many libraries still have EPUB 2.0s in their collections, and the newer standard EPUB 3.0. Mobi, so EPUB is the sort of generic vanilla format for ebooks adopted by Apple, Sony, and others. And again, the format held by most libraries. So there's this other format, which because of its open source past, still gets referred to by ebook developers as Mobi, but is now a proprietary Amazon format. We won't be talking about that. Except to say that most people make EPUBs and then run it through a conversion so that Amazon can read it in their proprietary formats and on Kindles and things like that. I often offer the analogy of it's like Internet Explorer in the old days. They have such a huge part of the market share that they just sort of make their own rules, and we have to make for them too. And finally, Ibook, which I also won't be talking about, which is a format that's specific to Apple devices and has a lot of really great stuff for like textbooks, like online quizzes, and a lot of embedded media and diagrams and things like that. So really great, but limited to Apple devices. So I'm not going to get into that. So The best way that I have to describe why it matters to have an EPUB, and even though some folks may refer to any like scanned monograph or whatever as a PDF, like a PDF, as an ebook, really what we're talking about is EPUBs. Alyssa talked a little bit about the need for being able to adjust the size and flow of text. And that's one of the things that makes EPUBs sort of intrinsically more accessible than either PDFs or actual print objects. So reflowable text is the biggest part. I'm sure you're probably all familiar with this. In one of the worst experiences you can have reading a PDF is needing to have the text larger, zooming in, and then you get this horizontal bar where you have to like read as far as you can until it hits the width of the display, and then you have to scroll to the right to get to the end of the line, and then you have to go down and then scroll to the left to get to the beginning of the next line. Not very easy to read. So if you need the text larger, that PDF's not a great way to go. Usually the font style and size are fixed. And I would say like PDF is a kind of a more designer centric format. As someone who has done some print design and stuff, I love it because for its fidelity to like what it's going to look to the original. You're turning a page using vertical scrolling, which again, Alyssa mentioned a little bit about how that can be annoying. It does provide you with the ability to have exact image positioning. The relationship between image and text can be fixed. And again, if you're a designer, that sounds great. But I would describe EPUBs as their main thing is being more accessible and more reader or user centric, right? So the reader controls the font size, and in some cases the font style, the typeface. You can swipe for page turn, which with having some kinds of print disability, which I'll mention, can be a game changer from having to manipulate a mouse or something like that. And kind of the one big downside I would say is, again, lack of control over exact control over what it's going to look like if you're a designer, and image positioning, I think, has always been pretty difficult. Okay, so why are fluid layout EPUBs more accessible than print? So a lot of folks have print disabilities, which is a broad category for folks who experience a barrier to accessing print materials in non-specialized formats. So they might have a significant visual impairment like low vision or blindness, a learning disability such as dyslexia, or an attention issues. Some readers may have a condition that makes it difficult or impossible to physically hold and position a print object for reading. So EPUBs can mitigate all of those things by providing someone with a visual impairment with the ability to change the text size, to specify the font, which some folks who have dyslexia find that it's less of a problem in some fonts than others. So being able to specify the font can make a big difference. The text is, unlike a print object, the text is machine readable, so it can be converted, can be read by screen readers, which obviously used by blind readers, but also can supplement someone who has low vision. And in some cases can be converted to Braille, can be converted to audio, and so on. So even though we've got a lot of EPUB 2s in our collection, often why do we care about EPUB 3.0? And I'm going to be saying things, again, very similar to what Alyssa was talking about. It has better semantics. It has those sort of the newer tags that she was referring to, such as nav and things like that we were already familiar with from our web projects. It has ARIA roles for more precise description of contents, or it supports ARIA roles rather. For math lovers, it's got Math ML, and it has richer audio and video media capabilities, and can do synchronized audio. Okay, so if I were in person, I'd ask how many of you have cracked open an EPUB and looked inside. But I'll just say that it's easy. So you've got a document that's .epub. If you've got it on your PC, you just change the .epub file extension to .zip, and then you unzip it, and you will get a set of folders and files. that make up the ebook, which in essence is a mini website for reading on certain kinds of devices. So if you're on a Mac, you can use the tool that I use is eCan Crusher, and provide a link to that in the resources, and you basically just drop it on that icon and it'll open it up for you. So when you get in, what you're going to see is a folder structure and some files. Because of the brevity of this talk, I'm just going to talk about a couple of them, mostly in what's called the OEBS folder or the books folder. This stands for Open Ebook Public Structure, but ebook designers call it the book folder. And in there, there's a file called content. I'm sorry, I'm having a little trouble seeing my own notes here. Content.opf. And that file, it's one of the things that it contains is the metadata, right? So one of the things that you can do to improve the accessibility of an EPUB, or to check to see, how much care someone has taken who's made an EPUB that you want to share with others, or make part of your collection, is to look at the, what metadata did they provide. So the property, there's a number of properties that you can identify to make it easier for the reader to know what to expect. So for example, here we see accessibility hazard, no flashing. So if I'm someone who has a problem with flashing causing seizures, I want to know right off the bat whether or not this text engaging with this EPUB is going to cause any problems for me. So that's a very easy way to make your EPUB more accessible. So the access mode property, you can indicate, hey, there's text here. This is textual content. Visual, this contains visual content, such as images, graphics, diagrams, animations, and video. Auditory, this contains auditory content, such as standalone audio clips and audio soundtracks for video content. Even tactile, this contains tactile content, such as embedded braille and tactile diagrams. And then another property you can assign is accessibility feature. You can more specifically say, hey, this thing has long descriptions, for example, which you're probably familiar with from websites, as opposed to only shorter descriptions of diagrams and visual things. Or this thing contains an audio description. And as I mentioned before, an accessibility hazard. Flashing. So anything that flashes more than 3 times a second can cause seizures in some folks. So we want to let them know that that's not there, or certainly if it's there. I believe Alyssa alluded to motion simulation with vertical scrolling, or the motion of vertical scrolling causing a kind of motion sickness. So some people are very sensitive to motion. So if you've got a video in your ebook that simulates motion, you should probably tell people. And sound, letting people know if it has sort of ringing and buzzing, and so folks, that can also cause seizures. So good to let them know. And I'm gonna, the last kind of metadata trait in there that is good to use is just a kind of summary of the accessibility features in addition to kind of itemizing the individual properties. So for example, you might indicate, hey, we provided short descriptions for visual stuff, but we're not providing long descriptions, and that way the user can decide whether or not they want to engage with that EPUB, or how they want to engage with that. Okay, so with the time that I have left, a few minutes, I'm going to talk about things you can do in the actual content files, which in an EPUB are XHTML files, although they use the kind of, again, the more structured semantic markup. But all this means for folks who don't work with that is just, it's a little stricter, and like you have to close your tags and things like that, and be based out of XML. But pretty much, if you're already familiar with HTML, you're going to do fine. Okay, and I too am going to mention structured semantics. Matt Garish is an editor at the DAISY Consortium and works on W3C and EPUB 3.0 standards. And he says structure is the elements you use to craft your EPUB content, and semantics is the additional meaning you can layer on top of those structures to better indicate what they represent. So I used the same example as a previous speaker, a footer. We used to use div ID footer, and anything in the world could go in between those quotation marks after the ID. Now we have something that clearly indicates the structure that screen readers understand and can respond to the footer tag. So EPUB 3 allows you to use structural tags like section, nav, aside, header, hgroup, things like that. It also allows the use, supports ARIA roles. So attributes that allow you to apply more precise meanings to generic HTML tags. You can define chunks of content, add a layer of additional meaning, and this helps assistive technologies to navigate a document by identifying regions and structures. So this is an example of how you might apply that. So here we're using the section tag to indicate that this section of the EPUB is the endnotes for the book. So we use section and role equals doc-endnotes. So hey, these are the endnotes. And then we use this ARIA labeled by, which says this section is labeled by HD-notes. And then if we look at the next line, we have an H1 header. And that H1 header has been assigned the same characters as ARIA labeled by HD-notes. So it tells us very clearly, tells the screen reader, hey, this H1 isn't just a header one. It's in fact a header one that designates that is a header for this entire section that has the role doc endnotes. So that can be useful. And then let's see, how much time? 1 minute. All right. So another thing that you can pay attention to is tag choice. So this is an example of a short story in which you got some dialogue, and this guy says the question is not of your strength, but of my art, and that's emphasized. So we all know to use an EM tag for that. A screen reader will read that with emphasis. But here's another case. The Don didn't mix much with us, taking aperitivo at the end in that first line. That word aperitivo is italicized here in the visual display, not because it's to be emphasized, but because it's in a language other than the primary language of the text. It's in Italian. So, if you're being conscientious about your content and making it accessible to screen readers, for example, you would use an I tag rather than an emphasis tag. And you would indicate very clearly, as you can see here, class, lang, and XML language, hey, this thing is in Italian. And a screen reader will know that and will read that with the pronunciation rules appropriate to Italian. And then same example in the same category of just some italicized text. Here, Libro dell'arte del danzer, which I'm mispronouncing, I am sure, but I'm using the cite tag. I'm indicating, I'm gonna stop my timer. The reason that it happens to be in Italian, but the reason which this text is being represented visually in italics is because it is a citation, not because it is intended to be read with emphasis. There are many, many, many. We're just scratching the surface, but I'm very excited about what EPUB 3 does to extend our ability as folks with just kind of basic HTML knowledge. You don't have to be a kind of master web developer or ebook publisher to figure out ways to make it easier for folks with disabilities to engage with your content. So I appreciate everything. Thanks so much.
All right, so like I said, I'm Kate Dybel, and let's get into this. So some of you might recognize a little bit of, if you're of the older generation, I'm going to say 80s in here, you might recognize a classic commercial from my title. The good old Reese's Pieces, Reese's peanut butter cups. Hey, you got chocolate in my peanut butter. Hey, you got peanut butter in my chocolate. Two great tastes taste great together. And this is actually a pretty good metaphor for what I'm talking about here. So, I love peanut butter. I love chocolate. I loved accessibility. I love diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And so, yes, I do think that accessibility should be involved with DEI work. But I have to say this, I really hate chocolate and peanut butter together. So now that I've shocked you all and you can just ignore me because of the hatred, I still want to say this, the point is there, diversity and representation are important but often underappreciated aspects of describing images of people. And where this comes from is I'm talking about alt text, alternative text. I don't kind of just fly through a reminder of what this is. This is metadata that's used to describe an image. And it's usually often used for low vision or blind users. It's sometimes if a browser fails to load an image, it will put in the alt text so you know what should have been there. And sometimes it's actually used in document and web searching. It has a lot of power. And in HTML, it's often put in the image tag under alt. And even a lot of programs like Office, InDesign, all of these now let you edit alt text in there. So it's relatively easier and easier to add alt text, but there's still an alt text crisis. In 2021, WebAIM, a major accessibility organization, did a study of the homepages of the top 1 million websites. And they found that on these homepages, 23.2% of them had missing alternative text. And this was ruling out decorative images. And 10.4% of those images had alternative text that was rather questionable. They might say things like image, graphic, they were a file name, blank. None of that was helpful. So 1/3 of alt text is theoretically missing. So, but it's also important to recognize that alt text is hard and tricky. And, and there's a lot of challenges to it. First of all, it needs to be concise but descriptive. You have to find the balance between writing too much and writing too little. So too short of alt text may miss the most important salient aspects of the image. Too long and a screen reader user can say, I don't want to hear 1,000 words for every picture, skip over the alt text. And at what point should the descriptions of an image in alt really be something that you put out there to become descriptive text, like in a caption that every user can benefit from? Remember, alt text is usually not available to a lot of people unless you're using specialty software. And so, and I'm going to have links to a lot of great articles here. And here's a big thing. A lot of people think there's a character limit. There is no character limit. That's a myth. There used to be one, but there isn't anymore. Alt text is also very, very hard. It's not just a description, but you have to make it relevant to the context. You can't just write alt text once and just reuse it all the time. There's always a little bit of context and you take advantage there. You could describe everything, but you really need to be concise. It should highlight what is relevant for your discussion. And this is, of all the articles I say, this article, Context is the Most Critical Aspect of Alt Text Everyone Seems to Miss, by Sherry Bernhaber. If you only read one thing, read that. If you have to read alt text, read that there. And my slides are up in OSF. Also, alt text is hard from the point of distance. The people who are writing alt text are usually not the people who took the image or chose the image. So they weren't present when the photo was taken. They weren't involved in the creation of the graphic or chart. They don't know enough as to know why it was. And so they might just be like trying to infer it, and they can get that wrong quite a bit. Now let's talk about what I really want to talk about, writing good alt text for headshots. And yes, some of this thinking influenced this conference's speaker page. So the reason why I want to focus on headshots is because it really constrains the situation. The images are simple. It's one person. The purpose and context is very, very clear. It's to show that person. The subject of the picture is most likely alive and contactable. So that actually can play a role in this too. There's just a lot of good value to it. And let's also focus on two visible aspects of diversity, race and gender. Now, there are other visible aspects too that we could talk about, but first of all, this is a 20-minute talk, and I'm barely going to make 20 minutes. Plus, also, these are two of the most common ones that come up and kind of what people are talking about in this. Now, diversity in headshots also matters a lot. If you think about it, the headshot is actually there to represent who is in your conference, who is in your business. So as a cited users, cited users can quickly identify how many women are speaking at a conference. Is this conference, is this company's board of executives all white men? Sorry for the white men out here, but that's the stereotype. But if you're actually blind or low vision or using alt text, if it just says their names or doesn't describe race or gender, you can't ascertain that diversity. And there are actually a lot of people who talk about the value of this. And really, a lot of this started from a particular blog post that started in August. This has been something I've been thinking about roughly for the last, I guess, 9 months. There was a really good, I'll say, this blog post was really good. It brought up an interesting idea that when you're talking about people in alt text, describe their emotions. Don't just say they're smiling. Make it clear. Is it a little bit of cheekiness in the smile? Is it a bit of a trickster? Is it a forced because you need a smile in photos? That conveys a lot of good stuff. I love that part of it. But then it had this section with a heading called, "Should skin color be mentioned in alt text?" These were what it said. In the context of a conference, if the speaker is talking about JavaScript performance, it seems unnecessary to bring race into it. Followed by, but if the speaker is talking about their experience of prejudice in the tech industry, that changes the context. So apparently your race only matters as a conference speaker if you're talking about your race. I could go on a lot about it, but this is very much erasing the reality of what happens with gender and race in a lot of conferences, fields, and all that. Now, also, I have worked in the accessibility industry. I worked as an accessibility consultant for several months this past year. And a similar question about headshots for staff directory came up. And this was interesting. So checking my time, need to speed up a little. So from this conversation, there are all sorts of things. Some things were good. Race and gender are important. And if you omit them, people will default to whatever is most common. So that's usually white and a man. And if you get them wrong in the alt text, that is really, really bad. So you should not guess. But then they say, well, in order to not guess, we should just report skin color and gender performance. I'll get into that more later. And really, some things were confusing. I said, well, it's a staff directory. Why couldn't you just ask your staff people how they want to identify themselves? And I was told, well, in general, for all the images in the world, you can't generally ask the subject's opinion. So that doesn't apply. Which I'm like, because you can't do it in a broad sense, but specific context, you can't do that. So confusing. And then there was this one, I'll just read it. Never mention race and gender ever, as the terms change too fast and alt text might not be updated often enough. I mean, yeah, that's an interesting one there. Things are changing too fast. Society should stay the way it is. But this is actually one of the critical things. This is actually a pretty common opinion in the accessibility community. Alt text should reflect what a sighted person sees, even if that leads to the same mistakes and misperceptions that a sighted person could make. So this means that if you misidentify race, you misgender someone, that should also be replicated in alt text, which, as a person who promotes social justice through technology, I had some questions on it. What if getting it wrong is bad? Why is that different and okay in this sense? Is it, you can think about this. Is this what's meant by the difference between equality and equity? And yeah, a lot of difficult questions. And these are just some of the good guides I found or readings I've done. So let's jump into race. Checking time, about on schedule. So first of all, I have to say this. I am a white person. I am not the person who should really be talking about race in alternate text. A lot of the opinions and stuff, I lack the cultural perspective and sensitivity to fully grasp the issues involved. I'm trying to be aware of my privilege here. So I'm just going to share what the current practices are and what some of the comments that have been made. So it's important when doing this work to be able to recognize what how what are your power privileges related to all this? So as I said, it focuses on skin tones. It focuses on talking about skin color. That is all that is talked about, skin color. And there is actually a set vocabulary that's determined by what's called the Fitzpatrick Scale. So this is a medical scale developed in 1975 for determining your sensitivity to ultraviolet light. It's used for various forms of phototherapy to figure out your dosage. And it's based upon a heuristic determined by your skin type, hair color, eye color, and also kind of how you react to sun. So this is sort of a table breaking it down. I'm not going to go into a full description, but I just want to describe what it means for me. There are 6 levels: pale, fair, average, light brown, brown, and black. And so where I fall, my skin, I am very pale and I have freckles. Although if you see me in person, they're hard to see because I have to avoid sun for other reasons. I also burn super easily. I have never tanned in my life. So that puts me at a level 1. But my hair is actually very dark brown to black, which kind of puts me at a level 4 or 5. And my eyes, honestly, I really don't know what my eyes are. It's only about a 2 to 3. I've actually had this assessment because I've had to have phototherapy. It put me at a 3 or 4 based upon the heuristic, which my doctors immediately determined, no, we're going to start you out on a lower dose because we have a feeling we're probably going to fry your skin. So it's not perfect. It's a medical heuristic. It works for a lot of people, but not everyone. And, oh, this did not come through too well. But actually, you actually have experienced this. So on the emojis, you know, those skin tones you get, that's actually based on the Fitzpatrick scale. They just combined levels 1 and 2 into 1 because it's hard to determine the difference. But so these are the skin tones that you're supposed to use for describing race: pale skin, cream skin, moderate brown, dark brown, and black skin. And this is kind of some things that people have said. It really seems weird to reduce race to just skin color because it oversimplifies a lot of racial identity. And there are several things in here. It's like you can kind of condense all of Asia into just moderate brown to dark brown. That's not really telling you much. You just say someone has brown skin. Focusing on skin color actually incorrectly suggests some people's racial identities. The classic example are actually fair-skinned African Americans who still experience the same social impacts that take place in this country, despite the fact that they might have a cream-colored skin or light brown skin. There are multiple criticisms of the emoji skin tones as well, because 5 things to address representation, it's not exactly the best. And of course, the full Fitzpatrick scale. Sometimes people point out there are 3 levels for white people. That doesn't seem right, but only 1 for really black people. But that's because it's about ultraviolet light and melanin, not related to, you know, the vast sociocultural history that has determined races. And these are some readings. I'm doing okay. So gender in alt text. Let's get into gender. Now, this, I have to say something else. I have some privilege here in talking about this. I am a trans woman. I have lived as my true self for 20 years. August will be my birthday in a sense. And I will tell you that every day of my life, I still experience dysphoria and fear of being misgendered. It's part of just my life. And I can tell you that the latest rounds of anti-transgender legislation throughout this country has not helped that. I felt safer during the George W. Bush administration. And I just want to say this, please don't come up to me and say, oh, you are clearly a woman or a girl, you pass well. You're not actually going to be helping me. It's something that's very, it's actually part of my identity. It's something that a lot of trans people go through. It's part of it. It kind of sucks that we do, but you know, it gives me some perspective. So in this case, what all the guides seem to recommend is focusing on gender performance. And by this, it means like describe the clothing and accessories, you know, focus on like hair and skin, wearing their makeup, jewelry, or things like describe their body shape, if they have facial hair. And a lot of this is associated with common cultural gender roles. And particularly the Cooper-Hewitt guidelines, which are cited by a lot of people for good guides on writing alt text. And these are good in some ways, but these are things that it says. Oh, by the way, Cooper-Hewitt is a sub-museum of the Smithsonian. It's like the Museum of Design, I think. So no assumptions should be made about the gender of a person. Where gender is clearly performed, it should be described. When unknown, a person should be described using they, them, and person. Unless gender performance is being described, then you assign she or he. Now notice throughout this, though, they never describe what gender performance is. So, you know, let's go to the person who develop term. Oh, and this is one of their examples where they're like, oh, clearly that's a man and a woman. Gender is so being performed here. Well, here's the problem. Per Judith Butler, the coiner of the term, gender is always being performed in that we control our visage, how we look, and our actions to express our gender identity. And that is true for cisgender men, cisgender women. It's true for non-binary people, people who, kind of define their own gender. And here's the thing, it doesn't map clearly to specific genders. Now I know more men who I know men who wear more makeup than I do, and I wear none. And here's the other thing too, the Cooper-Hewitt guidelines assumes a gender binary. It's that it's man or woman or really unknown. And it's not unknown or in the sense of non-binary, it's just like, oh, we don't know. And they don't discuss the existence of trans people at all in there. And these are actually fairly recent, like from like 5 years ago. And here's some other things too, and focusing on performance, it kind of is completely erasing the notions of that there's more than binary gender. And because of all people who are sort of falling outside of the norms of gender performance are trans people, this means that these guidelines will misgender non-binary people in alt text the most. So it's actually persecutory against them. Okay, 2 minutes. But importantly, this isn't just about transgender people. Here's an example from Code4Lib. So on screen here is a picture of Chris Borg, the director of MIT Libraries. Chris is an out and proud, openly butch, lesbian, cisgender woman. So this picture of Chris Borg is she is a white woman, in her 50s who has gray short cropped hair, is wearing what are traditionally called men's clothes, a really nice button-down shirt, tie, and a suit vest, all pretty much very impeccably tailored. By the way, the name Chris is also rather gender ambiguous. Could be Christopher, could be Christina. And she regularly gets misgendered. By the way, Chris Borg was the 2018 opening keynote. So this is part of our group here. And so, yeah, 2020 on Twitter, she got misgendered. The person realized it and apologized, though. And Chris has actually written about these issues. And here's just one of those. And here's some additional thoughts on gender in alt text. A lot of times when people learn that someone's trans, they'll actually focus on what parts pass and what parts don't. So you get this extra level of scrutiny. And I really don't know exactly how would you put, say, trans woman in alt text. Do I need to say trans woman, or do I just say, as I usually do, a geek lady or geek girl? And really, we need a study of this. There's a bunch of studies about race and alt text. There's no group studies focusing on trans opinions here. We need that. And if you're interested in it, talk to me. So just to wrap this up, I am at 22 seconds. I have advice on what to write. Describe their person, ask them to consider mentioning their gender, race, anything else, and there's that. But alt text is hard, and there are a lot of complex questions we need to work on. But really, let's keep mixing DEI and accessibility, but keep chocolate and peanut butter separate. So I will happily take questions on Slack, and we need to move on to the next person who I have to take a look at my screen to see who that is. So next up is Abigail Gobin, Sebastian Karcher, and Randy Colin in Actually Accessible Data, a Call to Action.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who are following along on Twitter, I didn't have internet an hour ago. So that's been fun, but we have internet again. So this is an Actually Accessible Data, a Call to Action. And I am delighted to be here today with two of my colleagues, Randy Cullen, who is a PhD in disability studies at the University of Illinois, Chicago. He's a research assistant at ADA Park and a disability advocate, and one of my former students. For those of you I have not met, I'm Abigail Gobin. I'm the data management librarian, data policy advisor, and an associate professor at UIC. I use she and her pronouns. And our third collaborator is Sebastian Karcher, who is the Associate Director of the Qualitative Data Repository and a Research Assistant Professor of Political Science at Syracuse University. So when we started this conversation, Sebastian and I were chatting and we were talking about the idea of data accessibility and what did that mean? And almost immediately, we came up with the challenge that there are at least 5 different definitions for the word accessibility when we're talking about data. I believe we've identified 1 or 2 more, but these are the 5 that we started with. Data is in a format and location where it can be retrieved. This could be a repository. This could be your desktop. It kind of varies. Data can be downloaded by a new user after discovery. So moving past just identifying where it is to can we download it and actually do something with that data? Is there some kind of limitation? The third definition draws on what we would consider the accessibility piece of the FAIR principles, where data can be accessed by machines or in an automated fashion, right? They use accessible, they only really talk about, they prioritize computer access to data. The fourth definition looks at the paywalls. And I know I don't have to explain the challenge of scholarly communication and the paywalls to you. We're seeing that in the data world right now, where data is moving behind socioeconomic limitations, or we see the difference between what's happening in the global West or the global South. Where we wanted to focus, though, and what our consideration was, is the definition that data is easily used by everyone, including disabled people. So that's the when we say accessibility, unless I correct to one of these other 4 definitions, that's the definition we're going to speak about today. And I'm going to pass it over to Randy.
Thanks, Abigail. Unfortunately, I've missed many of the talks going on in this conference, but reading through the titles, I can tell that accessibility, inclusion, and disability seems to be on a lot of people's minds, which is commendable and appropriate, given that worldwide about 1 billion people have a disability. And in the US, according to the CDC, over 1 in 4 adults have a disability. So it's a lot of people to think about. And I'll add too, given some earlier talks as well, that even if someone doesn't have a disability today, they may have one tomorrow. So it could be something that could affect you or someone you know, either now or in the near future. Keeping that in mind, it's also worth noting that there's nothing inherently inaccessible about data or programs or pretty much anything that can be accessed on the computer. If we think about codes, they are in essence numbers and symbols, and it's how we arrange these numbers and symbols that often determines whether something is accessible to a person with a disability like myself. So I will say here that we have an ethical and moral duty to include disabled people for its own sake and for the significant portion it makes up of the population. Next slide, please. And while I'll always stress that disability should be included for its own sake, I'll also throw in a little bit of the financial ramifications that are possible if accessibility guidelines are not adhered to. As I'm sure many of you know, we live in a pretty litigious society where there are accessibility laws and policies that should be followed. It can sometimes be hard to follow and they often change, but failing to make things accessible for certain institutions can lead to a lawsuit, which can cost your institution money and resources. On the flip side, if you are putting something out there, you're a vendor, a provider, there are institutions with librarians and disability advocates who are calling for their institutions to only work with vendors who provide accessible material. So if you yourself aren't putting out accessible material, there can be institutions who do not want to work with you. Keep in mind too that typically it's easier to make things accessible from the beginning than it is to go back and retrofit it in later, either due to a lawsuit or because an institution you want to work with requires it. So it could be in you or your institution's financial and professional interest to build in accessibility as early in as possible. Next slide, please. So doing a little bit of a carrot and a stick routine, besides potential financial ramifications and ethical and moral obligations, making things more accessible can improve products and services overall. So if we think, for instance, about low vision or partially sighted people, again, like myself, a lot of times when we're thinking about accessibility, in essence, we're at least a big part of it is thinking about how to make things easier to see. So I'll ask, who doesn't want things to be easy to see? It seems like maybe a common sense, maybe a little flippant way to approach things. But if we also think about it, a lot of the guidelines for making material and products more visually accessible also make things more accessible for people with learning disabilities, especially dyslexia. So by thinking through this element of accessibility, we're not just benefiting with this one subgroup, but are potentially benefiting many people. Thinking about PDFs, we often publish our papers in PDFs and whatnot. Making it accessible to a screen reader user means that the screen reader user can have all the elements on the PDF read out loud to them. Now I'll say making this possible for a screen reader user also makes it possible for all people. And I can say as a PhD student, now candidate, that a lot of students do like to listen to PDFs on the go, so that by increasing accessibility for this specific group again, we're creating more options for more people. And then scaling back again to screen readers, taking a slightly deeper dive. For those who don't know, in essence, a screen reader reads all the elements on a computer or other electronic device out loud to the individual. And the traditional way to navigate what a sighted person will normally see on the screen is to use a keyboard. So if we're thinking about accessibility for a screen reader user, we're often thinking about how to remove clutter and make it easier for a user to navigate from one important element to another. So I'll ask again, who does decluttering and easy navigation benefit? So of course, the screen reader user, like I just mentioned, but also people with learning disabilities, especially dyslexia, also potentially people with intellectual disabilities, but also we can argue just the general user. Anyone who isn't an expert, say, in your library search catalog or whatever program or website that we need to use to access your data and services, will want an easy entry to be able to use it. So by thinking through accessibility, we're potentially not just helping screen reader users like myself, but making our products more usable and easier to access for many, if not all people. And to talk a little bit more about the progress we've made on accessibility or lack thereof so far and some next steps we can implement, I'll hand the reins back over to Abigail. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Randy. So because of Sebastian and I's work, my work in research data management, Sebastian's work with qualitative data, the qualitative data repository, we focused on this for ourselves from a data repository and data access perspective. So we're both facing all of these data obligations. If you've spoken to me in the last 18 months, you know that the only thing I'm thinking about is the NIH data sharing policy. And it raised the question of where are our repositories? When we talk about, are they accessible? Do they have these features and options? Where are our standards? Where are our curation guides? What's even out there? So we set out to identify some of that. And we'll start here with the repositories. You can see these tests were run. They are the wave tests, and we're aware of the limitations of those, but they're a starting place for us. Certainly not, this is a floor, not where we want to get to, but you can see immediately OSF, which we're using for this conference, has some very particular accessibility challenges within the repository software itself. Harvard Dataverse similarly had a number of problems. Come back to that in a second. On the flip side, Figshare and Dryad, which a number of us use for our institutional repositories, for our data repositories, UIC is a Figshare shop. They're doing a little better with Wave. Now, I'm delighted to report, we've been working on this for about a year together, and I'm delighted to report that because of our beginning efforts, Harvard Dataverse, in response to work with QDR, has made significant improvements. We've been able to advocate, and Sebastian and his team have been able to advocate for immediate improvements. So this is looking better already, but we haven't had a chance to update and rerun these tests. Where we are in terms of standards, in terms of data, these will probably sound familiar. Everyone talks about the FAIR principles and the CARE principles. Nothing in here addresses accessibility from the perspective and the definition that we are using. That's a problem. That is a huge problem, because if we're codifying in law and in policy, federal policy codifies FAIR and CARE, and it does not mention accessibility. All the things related to the NIH data sharing policy that goes into effect next January, nothing in there says anything about accessibility for researchers, other than meeting basic web accessibility. It's just not there. And then there's what's in our own houses. We look at OSF and we look at Figshare, we look at FAIR and CARE, those are kind of external to us. What's within our own work as data librarians and data curators? Again, we don't have accessibility in the data curation spec kit, in most of our data curation primers. The data curation primer for R that's from the DCN network does talk about accessibility. We want to make sure that we highlight that, and also Cornell University's e-commons. So we do have a couple of examples of how you could do this and how you could include this, but it's not universal yet by any stretch. And it is absolutely a problem, because then that's not part of what we're teaching. It is not part of how we are engaging with the data that's coming into our repositories. It's a huge gap. This is an enormous challenge. The data, when I say data, everybody's like, what kind? So all the different kinds of data and all the myriad options we have, what can we do now? What are the first steps that we can take? We are not here today to give you all of the solutions, because that's going to take all of us and a lot of people and a lot of ideas. But these are a couple that we can start with, some low-hanging fruit that we can begin to work towards. One is to look at your data repository. Is it meeting those accessibility issues, the basic web accessibility issues? If you're on Harvard Dataverse, please reach out to Sebastian and see what else we can do to improve. How do we advocate to OSF to make the work that we're presenting today accessible more broadly? Figshare, we have to hold them accountable. Same with Dryad. We've heard already in this session some discussion about the accessibility of common data formats. And there are some tools that help us quickly test for accessibility with Microsoft Office, with PDF. There's a couple things that we can do that at least hit some of that low-hanging fruit, at least get you started. And also it helps with good data curation practices. If we're not doing things like relying on red text and yellow highlights to look at the data, we're actually spelling things out in different columns. It's better for data curation, it's better for data reuse, and it's better for data accessibility. And then finally, we want to proactively make sure we're thinking about supplementary accessibility information for audiovisual data. We have our captioner here today. We also want to think about transcriptions. Automated transcription services have gotten so much better. It's what I use for my data course and my data lectures. I have to go in and clean those up, absolutely. But we have options and tools now that do make this a lot easier. And they're things that we can show people and encourage them to work with right away. So this is our call to action. This is our ask of you to go back and think about at your institutions, how can we mainstream accessibility in our data curation practice and our guidance? How can we improve the curation guides that we generate and the instruction that we give around data curation? We can choose accessible vendors and tools and hold accountable the ones we don't have to give them money. We usually have options to not give money to people who are not meeting these accessibility needs and who are not engaged with us in ensuring that everyone will be able to access and use the materials we want them to have access to. And then we want to include disabled people as developers, designers, and testers. The earlier that you can involve them in the process, the easier it is to catch the things that might trip someone up, that might prevent them from being able to move forward and to access things. Finally, we will be absolutely happy to take questions in the Slack channel. We also have a preprint of a forthcoming paper related to this topic. I will be dropping a DOI to that in the Slack channel if you'd like to download and read that. And our contact information is there. And thank you so much for the time today.
Okay, hi everybody. My name is Julia Caffrey Hill, and I'm Web Services Librarian at Towson University. And I'm excited to share with you today Unlikely Allies of Textbook Affordability. And it's a story of Python, bookstore data, and a discovery API. So I believe we all support the journey toward textbooks and course materials generally being available for our students and for those to be available equitably. And the cost is tremendous. As a student myself, as an undergraduate, I was dependent on course reserves and spent a lot of time in my library reading those. And there's so many other ways we can support textbook affordability right now, which is why I was so excited when my colleagues and I were given this quest from our new dean, Susanna Yaki from Sacramento State University, who wanted to create a web page that they had at Sacramento State University that listed all required and recommended course books for each semester on their website. Not just course reserves, but any open educational resources, any licensed content that had appropriate terms of the license to be able to be used in this type of context. So we set out trying to make this, and as you can imagine, it's not just data from any of the siloed parts of what we offer. It's kind of everything, and it also is dependent on information about the university's course catalog. So that brings me to our earliest unlikely ally in creating this, which was bookstore system data. And you might expect that the bookstore might be reluctant to share their data because they want to sell course books, right? But actually our bookstore is independently operated. It's not part of Barnes and Noble or anything like that. And most of their revenue comes from selling university merchandise. So they were willing to share their data, but it ended up coming to us in this form. So I'm sharing now a screenshot of a text file that uses ASCII characters as formatting and a lot of white space as formatting. And it's a table with author and ISBN and title fields with a lot of abbreviations and things that make it difficult to process in a programmatic way. We did work closely with our central IT office to try to get a data extract in CSV format. And eventually we did. We were successful in getting that from them, filtered by semester. And we ended up with 9,618 rows of bookstore data, all still very dirty. So very much titles that if you plugged into our discovery layer wouldn't bring up anything. And so ISBN and maybe author were really the best we could do in terms of the data we could use. Which brings us to our next unlikely ally, our discovery API. While Sacramento State University, where we're borrowing this vision from, uses Primo, we use EDS, EBSCO Discovery Service, which can also search by ISBN and return multiple results and permanent links for each. But that's not really what we're looking for here. We're looking for a single permanent URL, because if we just link the user to the search results, it's a lot, and it contains a lot of book reviews and chapters of books that aren't really the item. And we didn't really have the staffing to resolve that kind of giant Gordian knot of issues. So we needed something else to come in and help us bring everything together, which brings me to the last ally and the real hero of the project, Python. So I wrote a script that parses the bookstore data with its dirt and all, and checks for unique ISBNs. So it makes a kind of a list of unique ISBNs. It's not searching every row, because as you might imagine, across the university with a lot of sections, there's a lot of duplicate course materials. And then also searches by ISBN and author in some ways, using our search parameters that we scoped out for this project. And then most importantly, matches that information back onto the course book data, so that the URL and some other information that helps our staff is right there in the same row as what professor and what section, etc. So that makes it ready for our staff to review for licensing considerations, or whether we really have full access or not. And the project was great. I had only done one other project in Python before that was really building a web application. So it was a very different project. And maybe the most interesting thing code-wise I learned was Python list comprehensions, which I don't run into as more of a web developer user experience type. So that was really fun. So now I'd like to give a live demo, and yes, I am that adventurous. So what could possibly go wrong? I'll try not to let Trapdoor trigger the fire alarm as I do this. Please unmute and tell me if this is not showing up on the screen, and I'll enlarge it if I can. Okay, So to run the script, it's Python 3, name of the file, the CSV you want to run, and then the semester code. And this is uploaded to GitHub and linked from the OSF project page as well. So what it did there first was authenticate into the EDS system, which you can work out with your EBSCO representative. And then right now it's searching by a small sample of rows of data by each unique ISBN and showing the total results of each. You can output anything you want from what EBSCO's API returns, but this is kind of what I enjoyed watching tick by. And so I plan to run this every semester once this data comes through from central IT, and then provide this information back to our e-resources staff so that they can process it. And now that's completed running. Again, that was like a selection of the rows. And I do include the sample data in the repository. And so we just open that. So this is what, I didn't show you what I had returned before, but it was basically the first couple columns up to here. And I apologize if this is small. Let's see. So what it appends on there, you can see our proxied URL here, very long, and our what database it comes from and the ebook. And that's repeated across any of them where there's a search result that's being returned. I'll leave it there for time and just show you the end results of the web page. So I then import the CSV into Drupal, and the user can enjoy access to their course materials at no cost to them through the library. What I would say is I'd prefer this user journey to be part of the journey of buying a textbook or enrolling in a class, is that's where they'd encounter this information instead of a siloed web page on a course on a library website. But I believe there are others that are thinking about that, like Drexel, I think is kind of investigating that, at least according to Courtney McAllister of EBSCO. They were working on that last year. Jumping back to my slides here, some of the outcomes. As a result of the script, we are saving 15 hours of staff time each semester. That's an estimate from one of my colleagues who was going through manually. And we were able to launch the coursebooks page using this automation with 400 plus listings of free to student course materials for fall semester of 2021. And that would have been in the 20s without this product, because we had some limited funding to buy physical course reserves and add it to the list for the fall. So yeah, I also want to add that the GitHub repository is available as textbooks too pricey. And if you end up using it for anything, I'd be interested to hear about your experience. I also have, because I did a demo and went pretty fast, all of that, I saved the session as a text file and put it in the OSF project for reference. That's all, and I'd also like to acknowledge all of my colleagues and collaborators on this as well. I won't read through it for the sake of time, but it's there in my slides. Thank you.
I'm gonna go ahead and get started. So hey all, hey everybody, I'm Wesley Teal. I'm a metadata librarian at Iowa State University, and I'm speaking to you today from the lands of the Bokoshe, Meskwaki, and Sauk. My university was built in part through the profits and lease and sale of land taken from the Ho-Chunk Iowa, Minnewakanton, Meskwaki, Missouri, Omaha, Oto, Sauk, Sisseton, Wapikuta, Wapiton, Winnebago, and Yankton. To start out my presentation, I'll address what slow librarianship is. It's an outgrowth of a broader slow movement which emerged in the 1980s with the slow foods movement. What began as a movement based around the principles that food should be good, clean, and fair evolved into a variety of related movements based generally around the ideal of, as Carl Honoré put it, to do fewer things in order to do them better. In her blog post, What is Slow Librarianship?, Meredith Farkas describes it as an anti-racist, responsive, and values-driven practice that stands in opposition to neoliberal values. Slow libraries focus on relationship building, deeply understanding and meeting patron needs, and providing equitable services to their communities. Slow libraries foster a culture of learning and reflection, collaboration and solidarity, valuing all kinds of contributions, and supporting staff as whole people. Farkas notes that slow librarianship is a process, not a destination. It is an orientation toward our work, ourselves, and others to create positive change. It's an organizational philosophy that supports workers and builds stronger relationships with our communities. And it's a tough time to work in libraries. Burnout and low morale pervade library labor. In a 2015 study, Ellen Shoup, Stephanie Wamba, and Reed Bramble found that librarians faced higher burnout rates, role ambiguity, and role overload than other career fields they sampled. A 2022 study by Barbara Wood et al. Found that academic librarians are, generally speaking, in a state of burnout. On its own, burnout is unpleasant enough, but it's also linked to numerous negative physical, psychological, and work outcomes. Burnout increases the risk of diabetes, high cholesterol, heart disease, musculoskeletal disorders, insomnia, and depression. Burnout has been linked to dissatisfaction and increased absenteeism. Katrina Davis Kendrick has published extensively on low morale among library workers. Across public and academic libraries, workers suffer from low morale for a variety of reasons, including emotional abuse, systemic abuse, and neglect. For librarians of racial and ethnic minorities, the outcomes are often amplified, the negative outcomes, that is. Low morale can lead librarians to disengage from their work and to seek opportunities at other libraries or to leave the field altogether. And in her recent talk, The Librarians Are Not Okay, delivered at the Conference on Academic Library Management, Anne Hillen Peterson highlights how the stressors we face go beyond just our jobs. We are in the midst of an ongoing pandemic that has killed more than 6 million people worldwide, including more than 1 million in the US alone. We are in the midst of an ongoing reckoning with systemic racism in the US, as well as multiple climate crises, an election that was falsely treated as illegitimate by many to the point that a right-wing insurrectionists stormed the nation's capital. We are all carrying too much. We have to slow down for our own sakes and for the sakes of those we serve. So how do we slow down? One way I've been trying to address this question in my own work life is by automating away repetitive and tedious tasks. As a metadata librarian, and before that, as a technical services librarian, or technical services worker, I've had many duties that involved relatively simple and repetitive tasks, like crosswalking a few metadata fields from one format to another, like cleaning up metadata, raw metadata, and comparing ISBNs and things as in the last presentation. So even when an individual part of a task like that may take only a minute or two to complete, scaling that work over a large number of records quickly becomes time-consuming and can crowd out time I need for more thoughtful work, like helping to plan a systems migration or helping to build local controlled vocabularies. So I've applied automation to major tasks like updating 79,000 print serial items records, or updating permanent identifier metadata by hundreds or thousands of records in a batch. I've applied it to medium-sized projects like reconciling species names in a data set, and to smaller tasks like adding a date column to a spreadsheet or tracking work statistics. And I usually use Python for all of these tasks, but sometimes PowerShell. An automation is often framed as a means to increase efficiency and speed, which kind of seems at first like it's at odds with the goals of slow librarianship. But this increased efficiency can also be an inroads for slowing down. If we can turn repetitive tasks and workflows into automated processes, we can make more room for the kind of work that requires deeper attention and thought. And another way we can slow down is in our approach to creating automated solutions. I found at its best, coding can be a contemplative process. To design effective solutions to work tasks requires a solid understanding and analysis of the problem at hand, an understanding of the desired outcomes of the project, and any possible complications or trade-offs you might have to make when you're automating a simple task or even a more complex one. So taking the time to really analyze the problem area and how you're going to solve it, it invites us to step back, to pause, and to make sure we approach our design with the fullest understanding possible. By taking the time to identify the problems we are trying to solve, we can hopefully build solutions that are robust, reusable, and easy to adapt as the problem space evolves. My shift toward a more contemplative coding approach owes a debt to Glenn Horton and his mindful coding presentation at Code4Lib Midwest 2018. Much of the workflow Horton describes in his presentation fits well with a slow mindset. He advocates taking an intentional approach to planning before you begin to code, approaching coding problems with empathy for your users, for yourself, and for anyone else who might have to work with your code, and making sure to take breaks in your work. The other thing that has convinced me to take a slower approach to coding is that I've had to work with plenty of code that was written in haste, often by myself, sometimes by others as well. And I've learned the hard way how much more difficult it is to debug or extend code that is quickly and sloppily written. So now comes the hardest part. It's actually slowing down. If you're able to minimize burdensome tasks, it may be tempting to say yes to new work instead of focusing your energy on existing work. You may even be assigned more work because you've proven you can get things done. It's important to set and maintain boundaries so that the time you work to free up isn't immediately consumed, but it can be hard. I'll admit it's something I have yet to really master myself, but fortunately I can turn to the wisdom of others like Katrina Spencer, whose comprehensive guide to resisting overcommitment provides a variety of valuable strategies for identifying overcommitment, auditing our own relationships with work, assessing our work environment, and setting boundaries. And then finally, part of the way forward, I think, is for us who are more familiar with code to help shoulder the burdens of our coworkers and to let them help shoulder our burdens as they come up in our work. At its heart, slow librarianship is a communal practice, not an individual one. If you feel overworked or burnt out, so do many of your colleagues. In the short term, you can help them slow down by automating their tedious tasks so they can focus on more meaningful work. In the long term, we must organize. We need to do away with what Fabazi Ettar identifies as vocational awe and transform library cultures and organizational structures into forms that are more equitable and sustainable. We need to abandon the corporate culture of overwork and exploitation that often crops up in our field and adopt practices that are in line with the library's role as a community and learning institution. We need to do less so that we can do everything better. And that's it. So I've got a few reference slides. These are also on the OSF if you want to look into any of the folks I cited more. And I'll kind of go through these more quickly than is really useful for time. So thank you very much.
So this talk is what if you did very bad things with integers, or how the CPython sausage is made. This is us relaxing blissfully above the abstraction boundary that separates Python and the affordances it gives us from its C implementation. And this is the last time we will feel so serene in the course of this talk. So let us imagine we set the variable A equal to 1,000, we set the variable B equal to 1,000, and then we ask our REPL, does A equal B? Go ahead, what are we gonna get? Pardon? True, I am hearing true, and you are correct. We will get that A equals B. You can test this yourself in your REPL. Let us imagine we say A equals 10, B equals 10, and we ask, does A equal B? What do we expect? True, the room says true. The room is correct. Okay, what if we say A equals 1,000, B equals 1,000, and we ask our REPL, is A B? What do we expect? I'm hearing a lot of false, and you are correct. This is false. That's kind of weird. Why is this happening? I'll get to that in just a moment. Let's say we say A equals 10, B equals 10. We ask our REPL, is A B? What do we expect? I'm hearing false, and the answer is true. What? Okay, so what is happening here is under the surface, when you declare a variable, Python has to allocate some memory to put that variable in. And when you ask Python, is something equal to something, it will say, does this thing have like an equality function? I will use this equality function to compare those values. If A is 1,000 and B is 1,000, those have the same values. That's great, they're equal. But when you use the is operator, Python asks, did you put those in the same location in memory? Like, are they the same object in memory under the surface? And in general, if you declare two variables, they are not the same object in memory. Python will allocate them as you declare them. However, this bit of C that you don't actually have to be able to read, and I couldn't read even if I were looking at it on GitHub because it's C, what do I know about it? Actually defines a segment from a small positive integer, 257, down to a small negative integer, -5. And it pre-allocates every single one of these in memory when you start up Python. It figures you're probably going to need to use them fairly often. And so every single one of these, there's a little linked list, there's a bit of metadata about the object, and then there's the actual value. So what if, however, we said, well, these are just things in memory. We can change what's in memory. What if we were evil and just made one of those values different? Python went to look for 254 and found something else there. Well, we can do this. There's this module called C types that lets you kind of reach through Python to its C implementation. It gives you some Python wrappers for those C functions. And you can define a function that will find the location in memory of, say, your integer. Did I type check that these were integers? No, I have no idea what you're redefining here. Have fun, you do you, YOLO. But you could take something that you hope is an integer and find its value in memory, and something else, it's a different integer, and just take the value of one and stick it into the other. And then you could say, well, let's mutate in, let's change 7 into 10. And what happens? Well, as you would expect for I in range 0 to 10, print I, you get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 8, 9. Great. Math works too. 7 plus 1, now 11. Rock on with your bad self. So let's ask, what is truth? What is truth? Because you may know that in Python, actually true is 1. If you ask, what is the, is instance true of an integer? It is. True is the same as the integer 1 in some sense. So could we redefine true? I don't know. Let's try it. What happens if you mutate in and you say, well, let's just change 1 to 5? I don't know, something else, and see what happens. And then you type 1 in your REPL and the world explodes. Your interpreter just checks out at this point. That said, if you write that same code in a file and you run it from the command line, Python, weirdintegers.py, it will run. You can do this. Please don't try accessing things in memory outside of these predefined integers, because I really can't guarantee what you're going to do to your computer if you do that. This is a terrible idea, to be clear. You should try it anyway because it's really fun, but just with integers. So I will upload this to OSF and you will see my bizarre cryptic incantations, and you can find out what happens when you do very bad things to integers. Thank you.
So our next lightning talk will be I'm going to say patron-driven development by Mike.
Thank you. So this is, I just want to preface this with, this is an idea that I've been kicking around for a little while after someone at my work came up with, said something similar, and I kind of came across this idea. So this is just something that I want to put out there, and I would love to have feedback, thoughts, anything about that. And it is patron-driven development. Is this an idea? Is this something? Is this nothing? So right now, I work in a very kind of tech-driven work environment. And so what drives our development? There's three different kind of modes that I've heard talked about, and we've had presentations on these. The one that we kind of do is test-driven development, if we do this at all. So does our product, we have requirements and we write tests, unit tests, integration tests around that. So that kind of feels like we write the test ourselves as engineers, as a department, and then we test our software and see if it fulfills those tests. And that's great, it encourages us to iterate, it gives us an idea of what we're working towards, and it gives us a target to hit, but these are written by us. That's kind of what behavior-driven development is trying to address, which this relies on user stories, right? User stories are a thing that I think a lot of people here are familiar with. People have used those for a long time to kind of brainstorm ideas. But these uses them to build a shared understanding of between engineers, product owners, quality assurance people, blah, blah, blah. And capture the requirements of an application. So we're less testing towards specific functionality and more like, does this application, this piece of software, the whatever, work the way that we think it should? And that gives you kind of a more holistic way of evaluating the thing that you're building, that you're working on. But that still is coming from within the department, from engineers, from other people who are working on this all the time. And then there's a hybrid approach, which is acceptance test-driven development, which takes kind of that more holistic approach that BDD has, but still has like a specific test that gets run. So you would have like an integration test that tests your application. If I click on this button, I, get a hold request, in my catalog or something like that. And it tries to capture what the functionality should be. But the thing about all of these things, right, is that, and that acceptance test criteria is we're still writing the tests. We are still implementing what the requirements for the software that we're writing is. And so what's missing from this? And what's missing is patrons. So all of these approaches either omit the patron entirely, right? Test-driven development, like I'm writing tests for my software, or remediating, like maybe we're getting patron feedback from there's a bug here, this doesn't work the way that I thought, but they're not directly participating in that kind of development process. So we can try and get that that input from various ways, whether that's like interviewing them or doing stuff like that. But in the reality, like they're on the outside looking in and we build software inside. So generally, like by the time we're talking to a patron, we've already decided what we want to build. Like we want to build a web page that does something. We want to add this functionality. Like they're coming in a very contained kind of isolated perspective. And so what this results in what I call engineer brain, right? Like in a way, we can't get away from this. We work with these systems, we understand them in depth, whether because we originated them or have been working with them for a really long time. And it's really hard to see outside of that. Even when you think you're seeing outside of that, your perspective is still of an engineer, a power user, someone who, and we're not building these systems for ourselves. We're building them for a lot of different people. And we can't make that assumption about what we're doing. And so in libraries. I don't need to really explain this. I don't think, which is we have the idea of patron-driven acquisition. So this happens, we get a bunch of requests for an ebook, we look at those and we say, this ebook's being requested a lot, we should acquire licenses. And the idea is that we allocate resources where our patrons are going naturally. So if they want a book, they want an audiobook, some kind of resource, we're going to acquire for them based off that input. There's also, more indirect ways of doing it, but kind of like, acquisition, we are acquiring materials for what patrons want. And so this is the idea, which is patron-driven development. This came out of a context of building, improving how we can do e-lending and building out our platform for that. Is how can we improve how, if we're doing, traditional librarianship that's being driven by patrons, how can we do more development of the software that serves those, resources to them? And how can we build features that have been asked for by patrons? So instead of trying to guess what a patron might want, we go out and ask them, and that's hard, right? You can't really go out and ask one person, what, because a person can say, well, I want that book, and you can go give it to them. But if you build an interface for one person, 100,000 other people are going to use that interface. So the question, which is so there's the question that I'm kind of ending on, which is, how do we solicit that? How do we, that feels like there's an opportunity there to go out to people and say, let's not waste our time. Let's not waste your time. Let's build exactly what you want. And so that you can access the materials you want in the way that you want. And we avoid spending a lot of time building out something that maybe we thought a bunch of people would have used, and then you find out 6 months, a year down the road that no one's used it. And that allows us to have a much bigger impact on our patron and the communities that we serve. And of course, and the hard challenge between this is balancing the expertise that we have as library professionals and information professionals, and meeting the service of people. So that's the question. How can we? I think there's an idea here of taking patrons and the expertise that they bring, and the expertise that we bring, and merging that into a kind of a new model that's not just being driven by a very narrow set of requirements that a small number of people are choosing, and turning that into something that's being driven much more by the community. And that's, like I said, if anybody has any thoughts, I would love to talk about this. This is an idea I've been kicking around for a long time, and I'd be really curious to hear other people's perspectives on it. So thank you.
And next up is Matt with Data Access Networks. Oh, good. We had a Matt volunteer, because if we didn't know, we would just find anyone named Matt and make you give the talk.
All right. Hi, everybody. Am I coming through okay on the stream? Yeah, great. Well, hi, I'm Matt Hutchinson. I work at the Business School Library at Stanford. And this is my first time at Code4Lib, so I felt peer pressured to contribute something today. So it kind of gave away the reveal here. I was going to bring this up, but we've been looking at ways to organize our metadata around our data sets. So the Stanford Business School is trying to move away from the sort of traditional business education, which was focused on case studies and more sort of narrative descriptions of business problems and business practices, and move into more of a data analytics and a data-driven sort of educational framework, which means as a library, we're acquiring many more data sets, and we have to sort of build capacity to, we're expecting to have even more in the future. So we're trying to plan ahead and come up with a good way to manage that and keep track of it. Now, I'm sure any of us in this room could stand up and talk about how we manage metadata and all the challenges and all the different solutions and ideas we've had. So I'm not going to get into that today. That's probably a much bigger conversation. But what I wanted to show you, a couple of images here today, was from a simple Shiny app I put together to kind of pitch to our library leadership some ideas about once we have all this data, once we have it all organized and it's all, we reach that beautiful state of having perfectly, accurate metadata for everything, and we're able to track all of our user activity and all of our licensing requirements and everything else, what do we want to do with it at that point? Now, obviously, there's the traditional uses. We want to use it for discovery and for education, for budgeting and things like that. But can we also do some analytics and learn more about our collections based on the data we've been able to collect? And can we look at it in a, what are the different ways we can understand and analyze our data? So I say this was just put together with a handful of data sets. It's just kind of an example. It's an illustration rather than an actual working platform. And we're just about to sort of dive into the project. I was able to convince the staff at the library, at least at the GSB, this was a good idea, but let me know if you think it's a good idea as well, because I'm about to start work on it. So as I just found out at lunchtime about Fail4Lib in the pre-conference, so maybe in a couple of years, I'll be back with the same idea. We'll see how it goes. So what we're looking at here, and I don't know how well you can see it in the room, but I didn't want to get in too close because I've got some usernames and things just for privacy, but I can show you in more detail if you'd like to come and talk to me afterwards. The green nodes you can see in the network here are data sets, which are owned or licensed or controlled by the library. And the blue nodes are researchers. And so the edges connecting them represent that user has signed an agreement to access or to use with that data. So, a data access agreement saying, I will not copy or steal this data, and they've been granted access to the data. And then you'll see the green nodes are sized based on if you see up in the top left, sorry, people watching who can't see me pointing. In the top left, we have the PageRank algorithm in a drop down there. So, with a bipartite network like this, where we have two classes of nodes, PageRank is obviously more analogous to centrality or something, but you can see in general, the larger the node, the more important, which is obviously a relative measure, the more important the node is in the network. Now, there's a lot of different ways to measure importance and what exactly that means. This is just one example. But the idea is, rather than just saying, well, we know this data set has 10 users, this data set has 20 users, we can start to come up with different measures of the significance of these data sets in our collection. And we can start to identify communities within the data as well. So for example, and again, sorry for those watching remotely, down at the bottom here, at the very bottom of the slide, we see a sort of closely connected cluster. And here we have a group of data sets all from the same vendor. And it looks like, at least based on this sample data, the people who want access to one of those data sets want access to all the data sets from that vendor, for example. Or we see over here on the far right, there's a little isolated community where we've just got one team working by themselves who aren't connected to the rest of the research community, or at least aren't using any other data sets that the rest of the community are using. And then we can also see kind of, I can't, if I can point out, I can't really jump up high enough to point to it, but there's a couple of users who sort of bridge communities, who are the one person using data sets which are arcing across different sectors. So not only is this a different way for us to evaluate the value of our data sets, but what I would really like to do, again, in the perfect world scenario, would be to link then these researchers out to their research they're producing with this data. And then we can start looking at trends and saying, well, does the high impact research coming out of our business school, is it using, is it from the users who are all really focused on one community of data sets? Or does high impact research come from users who bridge across multiple data sets and who are making those connections and those kind of unique insights? And I'll just scroll down and show you the other one. So looking at the same network again in a static form now, this is even less, or even harder to see, I should say, than the previous one. This is the same network again with the nodes all equally sized, but now we're applying again up in the top left, the Louvain clustering algorithm. Now, if you've ever done any network science, there are as many clustering algorithms as there are network scientists. I think that's how you get your PhD in network science, is by creating your own clustering algorithm. So this is just one example. And obviously this is where you get into sort of the art of data science rather than the science part, because there's a whole bunch of different ways to do it. But so we can, using an arbitrarily picked clustering algorithm in this case, we can start identifying statistically measurable communities within our community, within our ecosystem of users and data sets. And so we can start pairing them up. So we see we have 3 data sets in this one, and we have another 3 here. And obviously, we can argue back and forth about which clusters, which should be in which cluster and how we want to calculate clusters. Oh, I should say, I guess if you haven't done any clustering before, in general, what it does is it's looking at the actual distribution of edges of connections in the network versus a randomly generated set of edges, and saying, well, are there any statistically measurable differences? But obviously, there's a whole bunch of variation and different ways to do it. But yeah, so the idea is we can hopefully, with an approach similar to this, go beyond the simple sort of people who use this data set also use this data set, but instead start identifying sort of communities of practice within our research community. And then hopefully, or potentially, we can use this to make recommendations. It could be another way, theoretically, to service sort of discoverability for users. If we can create sort of individual user profiles, or we know what users are interested in, then we can say, well, maybe you'd be interested also in some of the other data sets in that community. But of course, I mean, the risk is then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? And you recommend people use this one, and then they end up just using the same one that they're recommended. But at least in this way, we have some sort of measure of distance, right? So if people are just sticking into one community, we can say, well, this is what most people like you are interested in. But here's the data set, up at the very top in that isolated little bubble there. Here's the data set most distant from what you're interested in. Maybe you'd want to check out something further from your everyday data sets that you're used to using. And I think another really interesting feature, or another potential feature, would be to look at this over time and to see how these communities change and how people move, how data sets sort of move from community to community, and how does our community at the library change their behavior. So, are people sort of clustering one year around one data set, and then the next year that data set is out of fashion and everybody's moved on to something else? Or do we see distinct, separate communities starting to emerge with, I don't know, finance people are working on this set of data sets and marketing people are working on this other set? And then do we have, would we have a greater impact if we were able to create sort of bridging events and bring these separate communities together and stop people sort of self-sorting into building those interdisciplinary sort of communications as we identify them. So that's the idea. So if you have tried anything like this and you think, oh, this is never going to work, come let me know, because next week when I get back, this is what I'm going to be doing. But if you like it or would like to see more detail and more information, come and find me and I can show you some more detailed illustrations. And if you really, really like it, we're also hiring a developer. So if anyone wants to come and live in Palo Alto, it's nice and sunny, and then come find me afterwards. But yes, that's my idea. Thanks so much.
Okay, last session of the day. We've almost made it through, and I believe most people have made it. So so we're going to be starting with a 15-minute talk by Chulin Meng, Christopher Creswell, Michelle Cernovsky on small team taking on large library technology project. Some reflection on the quest for open source library management platform at Lehigh. And we will pass it over now to Christopher.
So, hi everyone, I'm Chris Creswell from Lehigh University. My co-presenters are Chulin Meng and Michelle Cernovsky. I'll be the only one speaking on the Zoom, but we're all available in the conference Slack, and our contact information is in the slides. So if anyone wants to reach out and ask us questions, we're more than happy to talk about it. So I'm going to tell a story about how at Lehigh we implemented open source library management systems with a small library technology team. We've done it twice in the past 10 years or so. So there's a perception within the library world that you can't use open source systems unless you have a large dedicated technical staff within your library. And so we'd like to tell our story about how we've done it with a small library technology team twice in the past 10 years, and also talk a little bit about how you can participate with open source systems even if you don't have any dedicated technical staff in your library. And there's a quote from Marshall Breeding about this. So a few words about who we are. We are Lehigh University. We are located in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, about an hour's drive north of Philadelphia, near Allentown. We're a medium-sized institution, about 5,000 undergraduates, 1,800 grad students, 540 faculty, and 5 colleges. And we have a small library technology team. It was 3 people at the time that we implemented all the efforts that I'm talking about today. It's 3 people today, though there have been some changes. All of us who were part of the team at the time that we implemented the efforts I'm talking about today are here. And Lehigh has a merged organization of library and technology services. So the librarians and the technical staff do work pretty closely together. So a few words about what exactly it is that we did. In 2010, Lehigh joined the Kowali Open Library Environment Project to design the next generation library system. We worked on that for a few years and then migrated to Kowali Olay in 2014 from our legacy Circe Dynex ILS. And then we started participating in the Folio collaboration in 2016. And we had so much fun implementing Olay the first time around that we decided to be among the first round of implementers for Folio also in 2020. And we use several other open source applications within the library at Lehigh. We use ViewFind as our discovery layer. Oh, my video just went away. I'm going to proceed as if you can still hear me, even though my video disappeared. Oh, there it is. We use ViewFind as our discovery system, our library catalog. We use Islandora for our digital repository, and we use Archive Space as for records and finding aids for mostly our special collections system. Oh, good. I'm told that you can still hear me and see me. My video came back. Okay. Oh, there it goes again. Come on, monitor. There we go. So as for how it worked out pretty good. I don't actually watch Curb Your Enthusiasm, so I don't know if Larry David means this sincerely or sarcastically. And but I mean it very sincerely. I just wanted a nice eye-catching GIF. So a few more words about how it worked out. We ran Olay for about 7 years with no external support beyond HTC Global Services that did the development work and provided critical bug fixes. There was only one really bad day when we were running it that required restoring from a database backup and then running some manual database queries to delete some rows that were causing the application to repeatedly go into a death spiral on restart. But it was relatively smooth sailing for 7 years. Other than that, we provided all levels of support with our small team. We answered the phones and support emails as needed, and analyzed log files and reconfigured things as needed. And it was relatively smooth sailing. When we were implementing Folio, we ran a local instance during our migration and testing phases. And it worked pretty well and was instrumental in getting our data migrated because it gave us direct access to the data. At the time, anyway, Folio did not have performant, batch ingest APIs. Now I understand that it does, but at the time it didn't have that at all. So you would have to load your records one at a time, which is not really tenable for this kind of thing. So my monitor keeps flicking off. That's very helpful. Come on. After we went live with Folio, we let go of this. Index Data now hosts a test instance for us in addition to our production instance, and Index Data's hosting service has been very good overall. We're still very active in the community at all levels, our library technology team, our librarian subject matter experts, and our administration. So why is it important for libraries to participate in open source communities? It's good for the library community. It results in better software for everyone. It's good for library staff development. They'll learn new skills and connect with people at other institutions and within the project. And it's good for innovation in general. Everyone will have a better experience if we all contribute our ideas. So open source systems require participation. They kind of live and die based on participation. Otherwise, they don't stay open. It's a lot like democracy. If we don't have enough participation from people, someone else will make all the decisions and you won't like them. So what does it take to actually run it yourself on premises? Well, if you are going to run it yourself on premises, you are going to need a dedicated, skilled technical staff. You'll need a sysops person to administer the servers and supporting services. You'll need a developer staff to write migration and integration code. Come on, my monitor keeps cutting out. Both of those people will be spending about 50% of their time exclusively dedicated to this project during the migration and implementation phase. That eases up a lot after migration. The developer probably should be embedded in the library staff so that they can be intimately familiar with the librarian's needs. The sysops person doesn't necessarily have to be, but it helps. You need management and administration buy-in to defend the time of these people and defend the project as a priority against all other competing priorities, because it is a large undertaking. Come on, monitor. You need subject matter experts willing to spend extra time testing your local implementation, because there will be decisions that your technical staff will have made in configuring this thing that are not the same as hosting companies will have made and other institutions. So you need people to test it more that way. And my monitor has gone into power save mode, so I can't see anything. Come on. All right. Apologies for the technical difficulties. Those were not anything with the conference. That was my own laptop being super weird on me. I'm just going to proceed from where I was. So we were talking about what it takes to run it yourself. And I think I had gotten through most of this. Yes, I was talking about subject matter experts willing to spend time testing your local implementation. So you will need your librarians to spend a little more time working on testing a local implementation, because your technical people will have made some decisions that are probably different than other institutions may have. And I have 5 minutes because of my lost time. I'm going to move it along. So how we did it with Olay, we bought our own hardware. We asked our central IT to recommend us something. They recommended an IBM X3550 M4, wrapped it in our data center and set up the networking. And then we did the rest. I installed the OS from a USB drive and moved on from there. With Folio, we used virtual machines in our VMware cluster. Our virtual hardware and networking setup was set up by central IT. Then they gave me an account in vSphere and I installed the OS and moved from there. We had lots of interaction with staff at other institutions collaborating on setup, lots of trial and error and configuration. Documentation helps, but will never quite cover everything. Please contribute back what you learn. We wrote lots of custom scripts to migrate and clean up our data. Please share that stuff on GitHub. And this is why it'll take a year or two to get implemented, because you have to iterate on all these steps several times. That's all I'm going to say here, but we're happy to talk about this in the conference Slack or via email. So when we implemented Folio, we took a slightly different approach. Folio has a strong community with many more institutions of varying sizes participating and using it. It has better vendor participation. There's lots of hosting and migration services available, and lots of developer teams contributed by various sources. And so that gives everyone flexible implementation options. Most institutions are using vendor hosting right now, but not everyone. We ran it ourselves for a while, and I know at least Texas A&M is running it themselves as well. So how can you participate in Folio if you don't have technical staff? You can still help shape how Folio works. You should join special interest groups, committees, mailing lists, Slack workspaces. We'll have some links at the end of the slides that you can use to find all these things. And then when you're in there, be vocal about your institution's needs and workflows. Every time there's a new major release coming out, there's a bug fest where everyone can participate. And that's a good way to get your foot in the door, learn about the system, and become known in the community. And get involved in project governance. It might seem a little boring and tedious, but it's important. And that's where some of those decisions I mentioned are made. And if you're not a part of it, then someone else will make all the decisions. So here's some examples about how non-technical staff in the Lehigh libraries are participating in the Folio community. Sharon Wiles-Young is our Director of Library Access Services. She's on the Folio Product Council. Mark Canny is our Manager of Library Lending Services, and he's part of the Folio Resource Access Special Interest Group. Lisa McCall is our Metadata Services Manager, and she's on the Metadata Management Special Interest Group. And Chulin Meng, our Library Director of Library Technology, is part of the Folio Technical Council. So if you are implementing Folio without a technical staff, you are going to probably want to use commercially hosted Folio. And so a few words about how long it will take you to implement that way. If you're a large library, 9 months to a year. For a medium to small library, 6 to 9 months. Most of this time will be spent on decisions and conversations with your vendor about your data. You'll be loading your data a bunch of different times with them, trying to figure out all the details. And this is a good opportunity to go through your workflows to simplify things. You'll be cleaning up your data anyway, so you can figure out what about your current workflows are dictated by your existing system and which things you like and what you want to keep and what you don't. You can simplify your CERC policies as well. So here are some links to Folio documentation. There was the wiki there where you can find installation and configuration documentation, the link where you can join the Folio Slack workspace, the project website where you can find information about the project itself. I rushed a bit through some of that because I was worried I was running out of time after my technical difficulties. Here's our contact information if you'd like to reach out to any of us for more details about any of this, and we're in the conference Slack. So that's all I had to say. Thank you very much.
Okay, it's going to happen this time. Thank you for your patience. I was going to just thank you for your patience in being kind of attended at the end of the day, but the technical things added a little extra, so thank you extra. I'm going to talk about some work we're doing at Lyrasis and in the community to sustain open source programs. Okay. So I'll talk a little about It Takes a Village. Lyrasis is a membership organization and we're active in the community. And one of the things we were hearing a lot about was institutions that were our members and in the community saying, you know, we love open source, we want to support open source, but, you know, we're a little concerned about sustainability. So we thought, what could we do to help? We approached IMLS and they've been very generous in supporting some work that we're doing. The whole idea was to bring together different open source programs serving cultural heritage, to develop shared sustainability strategies and provide info needed to assess and contribute to sustainability. So the first phase was a form and guidebook in 2017 to 19, and then more recently a practical toolkit. So I'll talk about both of those. I always like to give credit to all the excellent folks that are involved. I'm the co-director along with my colleague who's amazing, Megan Forbes, who's also the collection manager, collection space program manager, and we have an amazing advisory group. Rob Cardilano from Columbia, Tom Kramer from Stanford, Michelle Kimpton, who used to be at DPLA and is now at Lyrasis, Catherine Skinner from Educopia, and Ann Baird Whiteside from Harvard. And if you're good, you can see those people in the picture. I should make a game like a Where's Waldo. You can see each one if you look really hard. Each time I look, I find another one. And that picture was taken at our Baltimore forum in 2017. I also like to thank all the people that were participating in 2017 in that Baltimore forum. We had over 30 different programs represented, and I asked our nice graphics designer, can you make me a nice slide with all the programs? And he said, nope, because there are too many, so they have to go in two. So we appreciate all their efforts and the lessons learned that they shared. So before the forum in Baltimore, we did a survey. I don't know when we lost you, so we're just going to keep going. Okay, excellent. Okay, so the thing that we kind of realized in the survey and when we were coming together is there's not a recipe for sustainability. It's not do X, Y, Z and Xanadu, you're sustainable. It's not one thing, it's not a straight line, it's cyclical. And so there's phases and facets that move together and separately. So this is the facets. We wanted to, when people think about sustainability in this setting, they tend to think about money. Money's important, but it's not the only thing. So we broke it up into 4 different facets: governance, technology, resources, and community engagement. Governance is really establishing rules and processes, figuring out who makes decision, who decides to go live, who decides the security issue is overwhelming, who decides who pays what. Technology is all the software development and challenges that impact the development process in an open source context. Resources are both money, but also people and money to pay people. And my personal favorite, community engagement. This is the efforts to foster involvement within a community. It's really turning people that are using the software into stakeholders that care about the software. There we go. And the phases, there are 3 of them. Getting started, this is the early phase of planning, design, and development. Maybe you're in a grant, maybe you're still in development, maybe you have a beta. Phase 2 is typically the longest. This is where you're growing. This is the, okay, I'm going to move along faster. Do I really have, oh, I'm just going to whine that technical issues took up some of my time, but I will move along. Phase 2 is where you could die on the beach. So you really need to move things along. And phase 3 is assessing and evolving. This is where you're thinking, this is working, excellent. And this is where you need to be aware of complacency because you need to go back around. Those community needs are going to continue to evolve. And so you're probably going to need to evolve into phase 1 again. Why does it want to go that way? So you put these together. This is a sustainability wheel of phases and facets. And hopefully you can see that you might be at phase 1 with governance, phase 2 with technology, phase 3 with resources, although that would be a very weird combination, but it helps you to think in terms of each facet having its own phase, and community is at the heart of it. It resulted in a guidebook in 2019. I would say more, but you could download it right now. People really were receptive and said great things, but they said, this is super helpful. How do I do it? So I know how to use a mouse, I swear. I don't know why it keeps going the wrong way. So we went back to it, IMLS, and they very kindly gave us some additional funding to do the next step, to make a toolkit that made practical elements so that you could implement the toolkit. So the first year, which was COVID, which is super fun, we decided we would take the objectives, the moving forward objectives, and make activities. So for example, if you're in phase 1 of governance and you want to get to phase 2, your moving forward objectives are defining a need for governance, reviewing existing governance models, selecting the governance models that work well. And they said, those are great. How do I define a need for governance? So what we did is convened some excellent people that gave us excellent feedback, and actually talked through what would be involved in an activity that would help you define a need for governance. So for example, catastrophizing. This is where you brainstorm a list of catastrophes that would have a significant impact on your program's ability to fulfill a mission. So your program manager wins the lottery, moves to Guam. Your software has some huge infrastructure issue. They gave us super helpful feedback. This is a nice iteration chart where we kept iterating. Right now, we're at piloting phase. We've done the workshops, we've done the tools. We love feedback. And so if you go to lyrasis.org/ITAV, you can see them in process. We love feedback. Please sign up for the listserv and give us feedback. If you like it, if you don't, feedback is helpful. Thank you.
I do try to give more time when there are technical issues, but I also say that working report on sustainability, I've read it and it is quite good. I was reviewing it as part of my job at Syracuse University Library, so thank you. Up next is Heather Greer-Klein, Confident and Ready, Developing a Code of Conduct Incident Response Plan. You do not have to be confident and ready for the technology, though. You can panic if you feel like it.
Hi, everyone. My name's Heather Greer-Klein. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Samvera Community Manager. All right. Today, I'm going to share how the Samvera community developed a manual and process for volunteers who respond to reports of a code of conduct violation. The manual was created with a Creative Commons license, so you're welcome to adapt it for any community that you're a part of. I'll also share how we balance being a welcoming community space with protecting ourselves against outside disruption. So a quick content note, I'm going to mention the existence of and a few strategies used by harassers targeting individuals with marginalized identities. I will not be describing any content of any messages. All right, so first I'm going to briefly tell you about our community and the iterations we've had in the past few years when it comes to community safety. So the Samvera community creates and uses a suite of open source repository technologies. We started in 2008. We had 3 founding partners. We now have 33 partners, over 100 adopters around the world. Our Slack workspace, which is our primary community channel, has over 1,000 members. We have active working groups, and we have events with over 200 attendees. And we've had an anti-harassment policy since our first in-person conference in 2014, and it was last revised and updated in 2019. But beginning in 2020, the Samvera Code of Conduct Working Group recognized that we had a problem. Our community volunteers felt underprepared to address code of conduct violations or other community safety concerns if and when they were to arise. It wasn't clear who had what role if a report was being made and who made decisions when we needed to have a response. So the group worked with 2 consultants to develop materials to address these concerns. We first worked with diversity and inclusion consultant Sage Sharp from OtterTech for a code of conduct response workshop for the working group members. And after that training experience, the group wanted to create a detailed response plan. So we worked with community safety consultant Annalie Flower-Horn. All right, so I'll share some highlights of how that manual ensures we have prepared and confident volunteer team. So the first section of the manual deals with documentation and policies that ensure that all community participants are aware of the code of conduct and expectations for community participation. And the section lays out the work that I do as community manager. We vet all of our volunteers who are going to be tasked with responding to these reports, and that's who we call the response team. And we have detailed requirements for onboarding and for third-party training. So individuals on the response team have two primary goals when responding to a reported code of conduct violation. And coming to understand these goals was probably the most important part of this entire process for us. So our goals are to prevent future harm to the community and to mitigate, to the extent possible, harm the incident has already caused or is causing. So when handling difficult incidents, it can be easy to get distracted by other objectives, such as punishing an offender or defending the community's actions. And these distractions can lead to a response process and an outcome that doesn't serve our primary goals. And the team may also feel internal or external pressure to try to prioritize the mental health of people they're sanctioning, or to seek a form of justice, or to facilitate a reconciliation process. And these goals are beyond the Code of Conduct response team's capacity and training. So our manual details the process that happens when a report is made. Response team members are assembled. They form an incident team for a specific report. They recuse themselves if needed. For example, if there's an employment or close personal relationship with involved parties. Our manual has a checklist. It has a lot of forms for speaking with involved parties and for looking back at records for any previous incidents. So once the incident has been investigated and the response team is confident they've gathered as much information as they can, they meet to determine how to respond. And we have a range of response options that we provide ahead of time as part of our anti-harassment policy. But our working group had a lot of questions specifically about reporting decisions to the community. So that's well described in our manual. There's details about how to share information with involved parties and how to do a wider community public incident report. It's an anonymized, fact-based description of what occurred and what actions the response team took to address the incident. So these reinforce community norms and have a level of accountability for the response team. So while we were in the midst of this work, I was alerted to a different sort of community safety threat, one that came from outside of our community. Thank you. All right, so back to our scary times. So we were in the midst of this work when this happened. The working group realized quickly that the work we'd been doing around the manual and the response team, it really didn't apply in this situation. This situation fell squarely within the responsibilities of myself as the community manager. So I set about ensuring that our community channels would remain welcoming and easy to access, but also would be hardened with moderation in place to prevent access by anyone whose only goal might be community disruption. So for example, as we first became aware of this issue, I was told that a harasser had bragged about creating false accounts on Samvera's Slack and stated an intention of spreading inflammatory information there. In response to this, I combed through 2 years of Slack user creation information, looked at email addresses, profile information, and community participation since joining. And sure enough, I uncovered a cache of Gmail addresses that were pretty obviously preparing for a coordinated harassment attack. So I was relieved we were able to prevent this because, and as a result, I audited all of our community channels. I made sure there was always some moderation in place for new users. This is easy to do in Google Groups. We also now have an extra layer of security. If you have a non-institutional email address, you have to have a friendly conversation with me via email about your interest in our community before I'll let you into our Slack space. and so far so good. So for the next steps, we're really excited. All of our team is vetted, they're trained, they feel confident, they feel ready. We have regular reviews and procedures scheduled, and we're looking forward to our first in-person event. Even though you always hope you don't have a report, but if a report happens, we're ready for it. So that bit.ly link will take you to the Simvera Incident Response Plan and more information, and thank you very much.
Karen Majewicz, how we keep a small open source community afloat, reflections on Geo Blacklight. And we'll have some announcements after this talk.
All right, here we go. Hi, good afternoon. So I'm here to reflect on Geo Blacklight. I'm going to talk about the history of our community, our growing pains, and some of our strategies for addressing them. So this is my first time at Code4Lib. It's also my first time talking about some of these issues. So I'm kind of here with my heart on my sleeve to confess some of the challenges that we've had and some of the strategies we've undertaken, and to find out if other people have dealt with the same things. Let's see here. So a little preamble about myself. I'm the product manager for the Big Ten Academic Alliance GeoPortal, which is a collaboration of 14 Big Ten institutions. I've been part of the Geo Blacklight community for a little over 6 years, and I've been serving as the volunteer community coordinator for the past 2. So I'd like to start off by talking a little bit about what is Geo Blacklight. It's a discovery application for geospatial resources. So think aerial imagery, think GIS data sets, scanned maps. It's built on Project Blacklight. So it shares a lot of the functionality with Blacklight, but it puts spatial searching front and center. And it's collaboratively open source developed. It's a small developer community, but we do work together from a few different institutions to build it together. Some common misconceptions: Geo Blacklight is not an interactive map builder. It's not a repository for data, and it doesn't have some kind of back-end admin interface. Our guiding principle is to do one thing really well, and that one thing is geospatial resource discovery. Here's a link to our page, geoblacklight.org/about, that has a little bit more information about our technical values. So a little history next. Geo Blacklight was born in 2014. Some fabulous developers at Stanford, Princeton, and MIT were the ones who created it. And that same year, Kim Durante and Darren Hardy published an article in Code4Lib in the journal, all about the metadata schema that they had developed for the application. It's basically built on Dublin Core with some spatial fields added to it. And so over the next year, a few more institutions set up Geo Blacklights, including the Big Ten Academic Alliance, the project I work with. And in 2017, we started holding informal community meetings, and this turned into biannual code sprints. But at this point, I wasn't really thinking of Geo Blacklight as a community. I was just thinking of it more as a few developers that were working on the same project. That really started to change, though, over time, especially with Geo4Lib Camp. So this is a unconference that Stanford University started hosting in 2016. And many of the ideas for innovations for Geo Blacklight got cooked up at Geo4Lib camps. And this ended up piquing the interest of many attendees who would go back home and talk to their libraries about maybe setting up a Geo Blacklight there. So as a community grows, we need to change and make room for new participation styles, new use cases, and different skill sets. So the early contributors to GeoBlacklight were primarily software developers, metadata librarians, and they were coming from institutions that had spatial data in digital repositories already. They had preservation quality metadata and the technical expertise to set up geospatial web servers. Later contributors were often map and geospatial librarians from smaller schools, and they might not have available developers or an institutional digital repository to pull from. We also have converts from Open GeoPortal. So Open GeoPortal is similar to GeoBlacklight, but it predates it, has a lot of the same features, but it's no longer actively developed. And so a number of institutions have decided to switch over to GeoBlacklight. So growing pains. I've had a number of newer community members come to me and say that they were intimidated by our community, that there was a lot of developer jargon thrown around, and they were maybe not so comfortable using GitHub to communicate some of their issues or ideas. The GeoBlacklight's also pretty hard to install initially. It has a number of dependencies that can get outdated or incompatible with our latest builds. One of our members described this as a bad first dance. Another issue is just kind of a lack of clarity for how to advocate for new features and how to get their ideas on the roadmap. But on the flip side, a growing community can be tough for long-term members as well. One of the biggest challenges is that sometimes it's easier to start from scratch with a new version rather than upgrade, especially if you've already got workflows established. And so for that reason, some of the longer members were more resistant to change. And lastly, just a lack of time. Once something gets set up at a library, those developers are often reassigned to other projects and might not have time to come back to GeoBlacklight. So these growing pains have led to a few changes over the past years. We decided as a community to nominate a community coordinator, and that's been my role. I just kind of think of myself as just keeping the ball rolling, reminding everybody that we exist, set up the meetings, things like that. And we made some changes to our code sprints. So we stopped calling them that. We now call them community sprints in order to be more inclusive of opportunities for contributions beyond just coding. We came up with tracks, and so that each track has a leader who can report out at the stand-ups. So our earliest code sprints were more of like what I think of as a duocracy, where people would just show up and say, this is what I'm going to do. And we'd say, great, go ahead. But that kind of left a lot of the newer people feeling shut out. And so I feel like setting up these tracks in advance have given people a little bit of an easier time stepping into things. So additionally, in recent years, we've had an influx of new members with metadata expertise who wanted to work on the schema. So we put together a metadata work group. The bonus of this work group has been that many of the metadata experts in our community identify as women, and prioritizing this work has increased our gender diversity by several magnitudes. This group developed a new schema for GeoBlacklight called Open GeoMetadata, and it's on its first version, known as Aardvark. In case you're curious, the next version is going to be called Aardwolf. We plan to go alphabetically. So upgrading the schema has been one of the more controversial things that we've done. Some members felt like the schema was fine the way it was, but other members said that their institution wouldn't adopt GeoBlacklight unless we made these changes. So upgrading the metadata requires a crosswalk. Documents need to be regenerated and re-indexed. So as a community, we are moving forward with it, but it's been a bit bumpy. I also want to say sometimes one person can make a difference. One of our community members became an independent contractor, and he has helped set up Geo Blacklight at least 4 different institutions that I know of. So that can be something that can help out a lot if you have an institution without a developer. We have a number of ongoing challenges, though. Governance, who gets to decide? Equity, do the institutions with more money and more clout get to have their features put in first? Fairness, if a community doesn't have a developer, how will their commits be put in? Things like that. But I don't want to end on any notes of frustration. So I'll say that our next plans are to have a documentation only sprint to help people get set up a little faster. And lastly, where I think our future lies might be in having more collaborative installations where multiple institutions get together and set Geo Blacklight up together, rather than relying on just single institutions having to shoulder all the labor themselves. All right, so thank you very much. Feel free to contact me with questions or to chat.
So we are now at the end, but again, we still have some more announcements. And before I get to these, I want to explicitly say we owe a round of applause and thank you to a lot of people today. The presenters, the volunteers, the various local planning committee people, and especially our tech crew.